Is this working? Seems to be. Well, thank you. If everyone would try to grab a seat, we could begin. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Jeff Mussman, and on behalf of the Nahant Preservation Trust, I welcome you this evening to our Earth Day Symposium. Beautiful but fragile Nahant. There are many things in life we take for granted, but I think I speak for many when I say that living in Nahant has been a gift that I have never taken for granted. Each evening, coming home from Boston and crossing the 1.5-mile causeway onto Nahant is for me like entering into a different world, a magical place, a fairyland, the transition point from chaos to calm. Nahant is a refuge for me and all of its residents, as it is for many species of wildlife. It's been this way since I moved here 45 years ago, as it was long before I arrived, and I hope it will be far into the future. Nahant is an extraordinary place, a beautiful place, but it is a fragile place. That which makes it most beautiful is just that which makes it most fragile. We stick out into the sea, and we are surrounded by water. And as a consequence, we are particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change, sea level rise, storm surges, and drastic flooding. We have some of the worst flooding in Massachusetts, with only 2 towns having received more per capita in federal flood insurance claims than we here in Nahant. We need only look to the storms of the winter and spring of 2017 to understand the damage that sea level rise and storm surges can have. And things are not getting better. By 2070, projections show that we could face sea levels that are 4 feet higher than they were in 2000. Higher sea levels can lead to millions of dollars of damages and impact tens, if not hundreds, of residents here in Nahant. We are already experiencing those costs. The 2017 storms left us with damages of $1.7 million on town-owned property alone. We are this year being asked to consider an override for the first time in many years. More than 70% of the $600,000 that we are being asked to override is directly attributable to flood damage from those 2017 storms. And as I said, things are only getting worse. Today, we have a distinguished panel of speakers who will talk about many of the challenges facing coastal communities like Nahant. And to introduce our panelists, I've been asked to introduce Vi Patek, the president of Safer Waters in Massachusetts, which we know better as SWIM. But before asking Vi up here, I would like to take a minute to thank Vi and Debbie Vanderslice and Diane Monteith and Emily Potts and Robert Wilson and David Marin and the many other individuals who helped organize this Earth Day Symposium. We are lucky to live here. We are lucky to live where we do, and luckier still to have organizations like SWIM and like the Nahant Preservation Trust, who for decades now have been committed to preserving the natural beauty of our extraordinary place. Now, I would like to introduce you to our symposium moderator, Vi Patek. Vi is the president of Nahant Swimming, born in England. She emigrated to the United States at age 2. but if you listen closely, you can still detect the lilt of correct English in her voice. Vi graduated from Sweetbriar College in the beautiful Blue Hill Mountains of Virginia with a major in French, and from the Harvard School of Education with a Master of Arts in Teaching. Vi taught high school French and Latin for over 2 decades. With her husband, Mark, she raised their 3 daughters in Westchester County, New York, before retiring and moving to Nahant to sail in 2010. And in short order, in 2011, Vi assumed the lead of SWIM. Vi has been actively involved in volunteer efforts to protect and enhance our natural environment for more than 3 decades. Please join me in welcoming Vi.
Thank you, Jeff. So good to see you all here. And Mother Nature on Earth Day, of course, is lavishing us with more water, getting us ready for summer and spring. So tonight we are starting out with a very, very special 5 minutes that's been produced by Robert Wilson, includes his extraordinary photography, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and Dave Moran's pictures, which I'm sure you're familiar with. His work, they both spend enormous amounts of time photographing the beauties of Nahant. So I now invite you to savor the pictorial presentation by Robert Wilson of beautiful Nahant. To say there's to be no recording of this presentation right now, no audio. again, Robert. You made me cry. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. I'm sorry, I don't normally do this. That was really, really beautiful. And I believe Robert's going to be able to make this available to the public someday. At some point, and soon we'll be able to send this video out for the world to see. I'm sorry, I've never... It's just too beautiful. Okay. First, I want to thank Debbie Vanderslice for the masses of work that she did to produce this lovely Earth Day evening for all of you. She's astonishing amount of detail and hard work, and made a great team. We were partners. We did it. Really, really went well. Very happy experience for both of us, I think. Okay, so the next thing is to begin the speakers' presentations. You will have the opportunity to ask questions of the speakers at the end of the discussions among the speakers when we're all through with our questions and discussions. Unfortunately, I have to make an announcement about the absence of one of our speakers tonight. One of our scheduled speakers, Priscilla Brooks, from the Conservation Law Foundation, regretfully will not be with us this evening. She was going to address the topic, Saving Our North Atlantic Right Whale. Some of you might have read the article on the front page of the Boston Globe yesterday about the right whale's plight. The right whale numbers have been in decline since 2010, with about 411 remaining today. The decline is attributed primarily to ship strikes and fishing line entanglement. Fishermen, scientists, government resource managers, and environmental advocates are currently engaged in robust debate on how to protect the right whales. As the debate continues, out of deference to those in Nahant who earn their living from fishing, we have decided to table the discussion at this time. While this species has a long way to go to recover and survive in our busy ocean, 7 right whale calves were born this year, offering a sign of hope and renewal. If you would like to learn more about North Atlantic right whales and the challenges they face, the work underway to develop solutions to this crisis, consider attending the New England Right Whale Festival to be held at the New England Aquarium on May 5th from 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. The event is free and open to the public. Okay, so now we have 4 experts up here who have graciously come to Nahant to help us celebrate Earth Day and its beauties. So, I will begin with Amy Widensall. If you would stand, please, so we can see you. Amy Widensall serves as director of the Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary for the Massachusetts Audubon Society. She leads conservation, education, and advocacy efforts at the Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary and 10 sanctuaries in surrounding communities. Amy joined Mass Audubon in July 2018. Welcome. With more than 20 years of experience in the environmental field. Before joining Mass Audubon, she worked for National Audubon state offices in Pennsylvania and Maryland. She holds a BS in biology with a concentration in ecology from the University of New Hampshire and a master's in education from Lehigh University in educational leadership, focusing on nonprofit administration. Amy recently finished her PhD in environmental studies at Antioch University. Welcome, Amy.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me this evening, and I am just about the height of this light, so if all of a sudden I go down, we can play a little game. I'll keep you entertained. But thank you so much for inviting me to serve on this panel. I'm quite honored, and happy Earth Day, everyone. So as Vi had mentioned, I am the director of Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary, which is part of a complex of sanctuaries owned by Mass Audubon on the North Shore. And I started about, I don't know what the math is, about 8 months ago or so. And I've been to Nahant several times, and I have to say, every time I come over the causeway, I just take a deep breath and try not to look at all the birds flying. That's a real challenge, actually. If I lived here, it would be tough driving over that every day or whenever I would, because it's pretty distracting if you're a birder. But anyway, so I work for Mass Audubon. Just a quick overview of what the organization is all about. It's more than 100 years old, a nonprofit conservation organization that focuses on protecting nature for both wildlife and people. And that's really one of the unique aspects of Audubon societies, is that it's about environmental protection, but really about the intersection of people as well. So as the director of Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary, which is located in Topsfield, like Vi mentioned in my bio, it encompasses also the responsibility of 10 other sanctuaries throughout the North Shore, including the one here at Nahant Thicket. So I'm going to talk about really why Nahant Thicket is so special, and I see lots of, or several familiar faces in the room that I have shown me the thicket, have shared bird sightings, and so you guys should probably be the ones up here talking about how it is really this amazing green space in Nahant. So Mass Audubon is all about protecting land throughout the state of Massachusetts. We have more than 38,000 acres that are protected. And really the three portals, or what I like to say, the three legs of the stool, are education, conservation, and advocacy. And where the power happens is when all those are woven together. So my job is to oversee our education efforts as well as our conservation efforts, and then to also inspire and mobilize people to have their voices heard to protect our important spaces that we have throughout the state and globally as well. So this is why I'm here tonight, though, is to talk about really the magic of Nahant Thicket. So as hopefully everyone in the room has been to the thicket before, all 4.5 acres. So that may not seem like a large sanctuary. It's in fact one of the smallest sanctuaries, but it truly is a gem. It is what I named this presentation is Oasis for Birds, and it truly is. Even though the acreage may be not large, it's incredibly important for birds, especially during their migration, happening this time of year into really when it peaks is in May, which is really magical. So if you aren't a birder, this is the time to become one. So tonight I'll show you some beautiful birds that have been seen at Nahant to get you guys all excited to get up nice and early when it's not raining tomorrow and go see some of our magical migrants that hopefully will be there. But the sanctuary has nearly 200 bird species have been seen there, and lots of people in this room have contributed to those records and those observations and sightings. One thing that I've loved about being part of Mass Audubon is hearing the stories about how sanctuaries have been protected and became owned by Mass Audubon. And like several of them, Nahant's story is really, really quite special. So in 1948, there was the 4 acres, not the additional half acre that makes up the 4.5, but the first 4 acres in 1948 had an opportunity to be acquired by Mass Audubon, and residents here in Nahant are the ones that made that happen so that it was protected and could be used by both residents of Nahant as well as all the wildlife that rely on it. And then the other half acres came about much more recently in 2012. But the thicket is not only special for birds, but it's also become a mecca for bird watchers of all ages. And really that's of those 149 bird species that have been recorded at Nahant Thicket, 150 of them have really been recorded during the peak spring migration, which is the month of May. And 23 species are of conservation concern. So not only is it, if you're not a birder, not only is it like, wow, that's a lot of birds, but it's also really important and birds that are declining that need the thicket to be able to stop and fuel up during their migration and feed and rest. So and this would be the video up next. So why are Why is Nahant Thicket, those 4.5 acres, so important for birds? Why do almost 200 species of birds come to Nahant Thicket? So from a bird's eye perspective, right, this is Google Earth. You're flying over, you're migrating. In the springtime, you're migrating north, and you're flying along the coastline, and then you see this massive amount of land that jets way out into the ocean. Do you mind playing that video again for me? Please? Thank you. So bird's eye perspective, right? Flying north. I came up from Central America. I'm flying along the coastline. Look at all that. Not a lot of green space there, but I see this big hunk of land that's hanging out in the middle of the water. And I fly down and I see all this green space, all those trees. I'm exhausted. I've flown thousands of miles or hundreds of miles. I need a place to stop. I need a place to hide. I need a place to be protected. I need a place to eat a lot. I need a place to take a nap. And those trees and that vegetation and that protection is really, really important. So from a bird's eye perspective, those 4.5 acres and the surrounding properties that are under conservation easement and people who are maintaining their properties to be able to have bird habitat are a mecca for these birds. It truly is an oasis. These birds need those trees. These birds need those insects. Those birds need those berries. Those birds need that protection to be able to make it on their migration. And so from a bird's eye perspective, that's why it's an oasis. So what is this? Is this our rain tonight? No, these are actually bird migration. So this is what I do for fun in the evenings in the spring, is I like to look at my radar and see what birds are moving through. So when I put these slides together on April 17th at 8:30 at night, I pulled on my phone, I pulled up the radar to see what migration was happening. And these are birds. This is not rain, this is not snow, this is not sleet. These are birds moving. This isn't even impressive if you're a birder and look at radar for bird migration. These aren't huge numbers of birds in comparison to what it will be like in another week from now if you look at your radar at night and see the migration. It's unbelievable. So this is happening maybe not right now because it may be raining, but if tonight wasn't raining, if this was last night and I was here presenting, or possibly tomorrow night presenting, this is what's happening above this town hall right now, are thousands and thousands of songbirds migrating over this building and continuing this time of year further north. But come morning, they need to find a spot to rest, to refuel, and to feed up. And that's what Nahant Thicket is all about. Provides that, basically, I like to say, it's the service plaza for the superhighway of migration for these birds. Sorry about the feedback. So if when we take a road trip and we're traveling on Mass Turnpike or we're traveling on Route 95 and we need to use a bathroom, we need to stretch our legs, we need to feed up, that's our service plaza. For these guys, they need to have these green spaces. 4.5 acres of Nahant Thicket is that special place. So what kind of birds are we talking about? This is the fun part. So I'm not sure if the microphone, it's feedback. Away from me and very still. Okay. Wow, I'm not good at holding still while presenting. So this is.
Oh, do you want to sit instead while you're presenting? Here, give me this. Give me some space.
You guys told me I just work out all the kinks.
What's the feedback?
Okay. How are we now? Okay. Sorry. I just said to the other panelists, this is how I get to work out all the kinks. So now you guys get to sit here. Okay, so what kind of magical birds are coming through Nahant Thicket? So the first one is Baltimore Oriole. So Baltimore Oriole it's one example of these birds that are doing these long migration. These guys are coming up from Central America, migrating north in the springtime, coming up along the U.S., and up into Massachusetts. Again, they're migrating. Some Baltimore Orioles will continue further north, and that's where they'll breed. But these green spaces like Nahant Thicket are critical during their migration. They need to rest after they've been migrating all night, and they need to seek shelter. And another bird is the Hermit Thrush. So the Hermit Thrush is another example of a species that will come into Nahant Thicket. It's a migrant. These guys are coming from Mexico, some southeastern U.S. They'll make their migration north in the springtime. Same deal. So you're going to hear this over and over for the next minute. They'll stop at Nahant Thicket as soon as daybreak. They've been flying all night. They'll stop, they'll rest, they'll refuel, they'll gear up, and they'll continue on. Maybe a day later, maybe 2 days later. Sometimes they need a couple more days to rest. But the wildlife sanctuary here at Nahant is critical for these guys during migration. So how about the northern Perula? Same bird. This is a bird that's smaller than the size of my hand, and I don't have big hands. These guys are coming from the Caribbean, they're coming from southern Mexico, they're coming from Central America where they've spent the winter, and they're heading north. They got to stop at the thicket to refuel, to rest, to get ready to continue on their migration. Critical, critical spot for them. How about this one? This one is the blackpoll. This is coming up from the Amazon. Same thing, making this long migration, expending tremendous amount of energy, flying and flying and flying. Daybreak hits, they're exhausted. They fly along the ocean, they see Nahant, they look down, they see trees, they see vegetation. They go to rest, to refuel, to get ready to continue on their migration a day or two later. Another beautiful one, chestnut-sided warbler. Again, same thing. We're talking, can fit in my hand, palm of my hand. Small bird making a huge trek all the way from Central America, making its way along the coast, sees Nahant. Needs to rest, needs to refuel, needs to gear up to continue on its migration. Critical, critical for these birds. Ovenbird. Another bird's coming in from the Caribbean or Central America, heading north, needs Nahant Thicket. Great crested flycatcher coming up from Central America. This is bigger than the size of my hand, just so everyone knows. This is a bigger bird. It's getting bigger. Needs Nahant Thicket to rest and refuel during its migration. Aww. Scarlet Tanninger. So these guys, I've been showing you mostly the really brightly colored males just because they're a little more eye-catching usually for some of these species. So Scarlet Tanninger, same deal, except it comes from the foothills of the Andes where it's been spending the winter. Needs to migrate north, needs to go to deep forest to be able to have its young. So Nahant Thicket doesn't enable it to have it can't breed and nest here. It doesn't have the right habitat, but it needs the thicket to survive. It needs the thicket to be able to have more babies. Needs the thicket to stop, to rest, to refuel. Black-billed cuckoo, South America, same thing. This is bigger than my hand as well. This is a bigger bird. Louisiana water thrush. This is a bird you'll see along the water that's streaming through the thicket. Coming in from central, northern South America, continuing its migration. It needs the thicket to rest, to refuel, to regain everything to make that migration. Not all of the birds migrate, though, that come to the thicket. There's a lot of species that will be here year-round, like the Downy Woodpecker. You'll see these at Nahant year-round, so these guys are not a migrant. They'll have cavities in trees where they'll have their young. Or you have this species that uses cavities in trees. This is the screech owl, eastern screech owl. Again, not a migrant. So this was just a little taste of the birds that need the thicket, that use the thicket, that are seen at the thicket. The birds that Linda has seen and observed and recorded at Nahant Thicket. That's the oasis for the birds. But it's not only oasis for birds, it's oasis for a community. So sorry about the microphone issues in the beginning. Hopefully you caught a little bit of that. But it's the Nahant Thicket is the oasis. Love it, go visit it, experience it. And those Scarlet Taningers and all those other beautiful birds. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Those pictures are just so gorgeous. You need to get out there with Linda Pivacek on her bird walks, and she'll teach you. Right, Linda? Here she is. Our next speaker is Diana Brandy. Behind me here. There she is. Here's Diana, the hunter. Diana describes herself as a sustainable gardener and environmentalist. She has studied at the New England Wildflower Society for certification in native plant horticulture and landscaping. Diana is a member of the Grow Native Massachusetts and the Ecological Landscape Alliance of New England. Born in Ohio and raised on a farm, Diana traveled extensively in the U.S. and abroad, but after graduate school in Pittsburgh, took a job in Boston in 1995 and moved to Nahant. Yes. As a bilingual educator, Diana has taught at Lynn English and Malden Middle Schools. Indeed, working with children is a passion. Diana is a past president of the Nahant Garden Club and currently co-chairs the Nahant Garden Club's Junior Gardener program at the Johnson School. Diana and the students are currently working on their 6th garden, a native forest garden, focusing on bringing harmony and regeneration to our local landscape through the use of native plants and pollinators. Welcome, Diana. Stick it in here. Be quiet. That's that button.
Okay. Okay, this is all new to me, so I just leave it like that. Can everybody hear me? Okay. I'd like to thank Deb for inviting me to do this talk. It's my passion, and so it's very hard for me to keep a focus. So she's my focuser, and Bob has been our technical advisor. So I'm really grateful to both of them for this opportunity. And I'm now embarking on a different kind of career. I took a job at the Home Depot, and I got a job in the garden, and I have to say that it's been a real eye-opener, and I think one of the things that it's teaching me is how far we need to go to live in a sustainable world. And I'd like to just give you a little taste of what I deal with on a daily basis and how we need to really consider the immensity of this. I was only on the floor for about a week when a man came in and he said, I asked him, I said, "Can I help you?" You know, it was really my first week. And he said, "Yes." And I said, "So what can I help you with?" And he said, "I want something that kills bugs." And I said, "Okay." And I was a little curious, so I thought, I'll just investigate a little further. And I said, "Well, what bugs?" And he said, "All bugs. All bugs." And at that point I said, Really? Really? You want all bugs?" And then I said, "What about the pollinators? And what about the things that are going to build your soil?" And "No, I don't want bugs in my yard." I wanted to say to him, "Well, then you don't want to live," but I didn't. But it really forced me to think about what we're doing to ourselves and to our environment. We're trying to kill everything. And as you saw the slides from Robert and the slides from Amy, what are we doing to these poor creatures that deserve our undivided attention? So it has made me more empathetic to the plight of pollinators, and let's look at some of the things that we can do to transform away from these killing pesticides that are so prevalent. There's a whole, I know you've been to Home Depot, there's a whole wall of poison sitting there that goes out on a daily basis in large quantities. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what we can do to counter that activity. So we're not going to kill critters. We're going to enhance their environment. We're going to help those birds that are taking that long trip. We're going to give them the food sources that they need through our ability to plant good, wholesome food. And native plants and pollinators offer that. There's a man that gave a talk recently at the Grow Native free May, every month, the first Wednesday of every month for 4 months, they give a free talk, and he gave a talk on bumblebees. And we have, he's at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst and has done extensive research on bumblebees and their decline. Now, some bumblebees are doing okay, but others, we have only 11 species left, I think, and we're going to lose 4 of those in the next decade if we don't make some changes. And bumblebees, one bumblebee equals 20 honeybees in terms of its ability to pollinate. These are our natives, and they deserve to have some care taken. So I'd like to, where did I go? Excuse me while I, did I move this? No, I did. Oh, you did? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, because that's all right. We'll just go on. So who are the pollinators? You've got the bumblebees. We have the honeybees. We have bees of all sizes and shapes. We have our moths, butterflies, beetles, ants. A man walked in the other day and said, "I want to kill the ants." And I said, "Have you ever thought that there might be an alternative?" And he said, "No, what?" And I said, "Just take some lemon juice and a little bit of vinegar and put it across your threshold. And then on the outside, take a saucer of sugar and water and just lay it out there. They'll drink the nectar, and then they'll go off and be very happy because all they want is food." And they said, "Well, really, I'll try it." And he didn't buy the poisons. So I'm really grateful. I whisper when I'm doing this. Okay, so let me see where we are. So we have, these are our invertebrates, our pollinators. You can see how many species there are, and we want to make sure that they have adequate sources of food. You want to get the next one? Okay, these are our vertebrates. We love our hummingbirds and our little rodents. I like them, and so I try not to go when they're trying to buy rat and mouse poison. So, and all of our, this is another little vignette. When I started with the junior gardeners at the Johnson School, the kids would scream and get all panicky over spiders and worms and other insects. Now, we've been out in the garden this year a lot, and it's just a joy to watch them dig something. We've been moving some earth and things, and then somebody say, "How many worms did you find? How many snakes did you find? How many spiders?" Instead of screaming that they are afraid of them, they now are really comfortable in this environment. And actually, don't we want them to dig in the soil and not have it poisoned by our pesticides and by our fertilizers that we don't need? Use leaf mulch. We're going to talk about that. Okay. So we can go on from there. So we know the pollinators are in decline. I'm not going to go into all the details. There are plenty of things you can read. But what can we do with our little chunk of land? One of the things, we can stop using the pesticides. We can start using natural fertilizers, like don't blow your leaves off, don't allow blowers in your yards. Mulch them up and let them make a little compost pile. We're making 3 compost bins at the outside of the butterfly garden behind the Johnson School, and the kids are working on, they'll be making wattle sides. So we can do that. We want to think, so we're working on developing a healthy soil. Underneath that leaf litter is all kinds of things hibernating, and we want to be able to allow them the benefit of growing up and flying in the next season. So if they're hibernating, you want to have a garden that is 4 seasons, not 1, not 2, 4. You want your spring growers, you want your summer growers, you want your fall supplies, and then you want your winter berries and seeds. So you can let some of these things that grow in the summertime. You've got your golden Roger asters, you've got your helianthus, lots of those. I have lists. If anybody is interested, I have lists for all seasons, so I would be happy to see that you get those lists. And there's, let me see what I think I've passed some of this stuff up. I'm going to go on. So in our gardens, we put native plants. We want the 4 seasons. We want to stop using pesticides. We want to stop using leaf blowers. We want to stop using any kind of heavy digging. It's been noted that if you dig less in your garden, you have a healthier environment and it grows better, so you don't need to be digging up your garden every year. You don't even, you just plop your plant in, and it'll be sustained by the soils underneath. And you want to plant in mass. Let me see where we are. We need to provide water in various levels. So you've got your lower pollinators, like low level. You may have a little higher level of water supply. You want to make sure that, especially in the hot summer, that you've got some of that available for them. You're going to leave nesting areas for them to dig in, because our native pollinators a lot of them will dig. The kids just did some native bee houses out of old logs. We just drilled holes that are in about 5 inches, different sizes. We made a little lip on the top of it so it's like a canopy, so they don't get direct sun or direct wind or rain. And we're going to put those in our forest garden and the side gardens. So you can do lots of things with your children, grandchildren, on that. Let's see where we are. Let's go on. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just going to tell you that if you're interested in any of these things, call me, check with me. Come to the Native Garden Plant Sale that's going to be on June 1st at the UMass Extension Service in Waltham, and it's early. It starts early on Saturday, and we'll have 120 plants, and you can begin to collaborate with people who know what they're doing in gardens, and they'll be happy to give you advice. So let's get rid of the pesticides and provide for these little critters that we love so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. There's so much to learn, so much we don't know about the soil in our gardens. She did mention composting, and back on the back table there on the corner is a flyer that's been created by a group of us in Nahant about how to compost. So if you want to grab one on your way out, feel free. So next I would like to welcome Stephen Cyphers. Stephen, where are you? There he is. This is Stephen. Dr. Stephen Cyphers is an assistant professor in the Department of Marine and Environmental Sciences and affiliated faculty in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Northeastern University. He completed his PhD at the University of South Alabama and Dauphin Island Sea Lab after earning a BS in marine biology at Auburn University. Stephen leads the Social Ecological Sustainability Lab, which conducts interdisciplinary research integrating ecology and sociology to understand and develop strategies to overcome major challenges facing coastal communities. Current research projects focus on sustainable shoreline development, coastal fisheries, ecosystem restoration, and mitigating the impacts of disasters. Stephen also leads Northeastern University's partnership with the Nature Conservancy, and he is an appointed member of the Gulf of Mexico Fisheries Management Council's Standing Scientific and Statistical Committee. Wow. Please welcome Stephen.
Thank you very much. Special thanks to Debbie and Vi for the invitation for us to participate. And thanks for all of you for braving the rain to come out. So I basically just put together a really short presentation to introduce you to some of the work that my group and my research lab does specifically, but also give you a lens into some of the broader questions that people at the Marine Science Center are trying to address, and particularly trying to get a handle on some of the larger challenges facing coastal communities and ecosystems in the context of climate change. And so I generally like to say that I could give the entire talk of what we do as a group, and my group specifically, with just one really good photograph. And so this is one of my favorites. This is one that we took when we were out doing some surveys and interviews of commercial fishers in Gloucester. And what you can see, is basically what all of you see naturally as coastal residents looking at it, is you see the coastal landscape with some boats moored offshore, working the way in. There's a beach, then there's a seawall, a nice running path, lots of people accessing it through their cars and visiting there. Further off into the distance, you start getting into residential homes, and you start getting into some larger buildings and restaurants and all these types of things. And these are the types of interactions that we kind of see in our day-to-day lives with interacting with the coast. But as scientists, we generally start to pick just one aspect of this, and we'll say, well, what's the impact of this seawall on the beach? And we won't really look at the big picture often enough. And so this is the story that we generally try to tell, is how do we build the right team or the right amount of people to where we can focus on all these individual parts, but we can still see the big picture. And so this is something that we've been committed to for quite a while, and it's becoming increasingly important in the context of climate change. And so this is the 2016 census, and it highlighted some things that we already knew, but it was also notable in the fact that this was the census making the story out of how our coastal populations were changing. So in addition to just giving us numbers of where people lived, they really made a big deal out of trends of how our coastal communities and our coastal cities are still rapidly growing. These are places where we're still seeing pretty high levels of development in a lot of places, with more people moving to these regions. And historically, the way we've studied this is kind of what I mentioned. We grab a lineage and we say, what's the impact of people over-harvesting this fish species on the environment? And we study that. And it helps us understand the causes and effects of different things that people do. But our lens has always been that people do bad things to the environment. Once, a long time ago, things were natural, and then now they're altered as people have had these impacts of fishing and pollution and introducing invasive species and those types of things. But more recently, we're starting to, again, kind of take a bigger picture as a society and not just as scientists, as we recognize that all of these things are linked. And the census in 2016 was particularly notable because it played a big role in the conversation around risk, and said in the US there's 60 million people in the pathway of hurricanes, and started to link these conversations to, hey, it actually matters how you manage your beaches and dunes. It matters how you manage your salt marshes and mangroves for how coastal communities actually experience these risks. And so these are some of the issues that my group studies, and what I think is at least our preferred approach for studying it, is a big break from the past. And so historically, when you would approach an issue like this, and you came onto a university campus or you came onto a place like that, you would have these distinct boxes. So you would have the social scientists who were studying the interactions between people and their behaviors and outcomes, and they're probably in a totally different building than the ecologists who were studying the interactions between how habitats are distributed and what that means for the ecosystem services and benefits there. And for the longest period of time, all we really did was kind of shout between each other and say, hey, people do bad things to the environment, and we need to figure out how to do less bad things. And so this was our one connection kind of between the social sciences and natural sciences. But there's been more and more people arguing that saying, hey, we really need to tie this system together and say the things that everybody who lives in these areas, and this is not even just a coastal study, this is just how we study the way that people interact with nature. And look at it and say, hey, there's a lot of things that ecosystems provide to people, and these services benefit lots of people, and it influences how they behave. So if they see these benefits, maybe they'll behave a certain other way. And as I mentioned, as kind of the starting lens to this, and what a lot of people are here to think about, is that we're not only able to look at these things in isolation anymore. We have to think about climate change, and we have to think about a global economy, and we have to think about how all these interactions are not just happening at a local scale. They're tied to a bigger picture. But one of the things I think is really important, and it's something that's particularly central to thinking about Earth Day, is that we can also move beyond this idea of stressors. We can also think about how do we take an ecosystem that might not be in its best condition, especially in an urban context, and make it better. And this is the generation that we're trying to train our students to think about, is you're not going to natural places. No place you're working is natural. If you're working on restoration, you can probably help lead the system to a better condition than it was when you found it, which is not something that we've been doing for a very long period of time. And so we use this approach to try to address two big questions. The first is, how do we integrate the social and ecological sciences to understand coastal problems or to understand human environment problems? And then the second is, how can we figure out if solutions work? How can we identify solutions and study them in practice? And this part is where it always is good for me to say that this is hugely collaborative. So many organizations, the Nature Conservancy was mentioned, but lots of others are involved in this. This is not something that we should get nearly all the credit for, because there's so many people involved. So in my lab, we really focus on two things, and I just wanted to give you a flavor for the types of questions we ask and some of the things we've learned in these two boxes. Coastal shorelines and the ways that we manage our shorelines is probably what comprises about 75% of our work. And then we also do quite a bit of work in human dimensions of fisheries, and particularly studying some areas that we think have been understudied in the past. And I think this is very relevant for Nahant for a lot of reasons. The storms of the past few years being mentioned as one very key one, but also the reliance on commercial fisheries in the Northeast. We're in some of the most iconic fishing communities in the entire U.S. up in this region. And so this is something I'm going to highlight a little bit about. To start with shorelines, this is one that's been being studied for quite a while, but we're really rapidly progressing at our understanding. So what I'll give you a sense for is, if you think about the general question, if we're dealing with trying to protect our coastlines from coastal hazards like erosion and sea level rise and these things, what are our options? Think about it in the context of erosion being something that people have been dealing with for a very long period of time. Sea level rise is something more recent that we're really just starting to think of. But what you'll see is, if you look around the U.S. coast, this is something people have been developing, engineering, and implementing for a very long period of time. In places like Boston, in the inner coasts, about 95% of our shorelines have already been transformed from their natural habitat into some sort of artificially engineered state. It's places like Los Angeles, similar story. Places like Mobile that have a larger geography and more concentrated people, and then more rural areas, you see lower levels. But if you look at this map here, one of the things that you'll notice is there's some overlaying of these county level boxes. The brighter the red you're looking at, the more artificial shoreline. The brighter the blue or green, the more natural the shorelines are. And then on the inner map, there's these green map areas that kind of jump out. We have this overlap of what are our estuaries of national significance. The areas that we've said are our most ecologically important places in the country are also the areas we live and the areas we're transforming at the fastest rates. So this is kind of a collision of our ecology where it's most diverse and most important with the areas where people choose to live, and we're altering these systems at a really rapid rate. This next slide the picture's kind of big, so it takes a minute to load. And so I just want to, with this one slide, summarize what we've learned from this. So there's been decades of work on this. My lab's played a role in some of the more recent stuff, but what we know is that when you take a habitat that's a marsh or a mangrove or an oyster reef and you convert it into a seawall, you generally lose a lot of ecosystem function, you generally lose a lot of species, and you lose a lot of those benefits that are associated with biodiversity. This is the picture on the left. Some of you might recognize that seawall. That's in Swampscott. This was on the cover of Bioscience, and it was a synthesis paper that we wrote that pulled together all the previous studies of shoreline hardening to show how harmful that seawalls are on biodiversity. But the key thing is that it's kind of evolved since then, and there's a lot of other options. There's textbooks being written on living shorelines and nature-based coastal protection. So we're no longer where we were decades ago where we didn't have other alternatives. Now there's lots of other strategies for protecting our coastlines in ways that still have the societal benefits that we desire, but have some sort of balance with nature as well. We've worked on quite a few of these projects in different parts of the country, in places that are sheltered and have marsh as the natural landscape. You can do things such as living shorelines, where you don't actually put any artificial structure on the shoreline, but instead you put some sort of wave attenuation breakwater in systems like North Carolina further south, even actually into some of the states like Rhode Island, south of the Cape. You can restore oyster reefs along marshes, and they can give you those engineering principles that allow the natural marshes to kind of survive. And so this is the type of study there where you get environmental benefits from a shoreline stabilization approach. The other thing that my lab works on a lot, and I'm going to tell you a story from some work we've done up here with this, is on the impacts of climate change in fisheries, and particularly the way it influences both the fish populations themselves and the fishing communities, and the critical role that management plays here in the middle. And the key backstory on this, just to get you up to speed, is that in terms of how warming waters and changing oceanic conditions impacts fisheries, we know quite a bit now about the fish themselves. We know which ones are more likely to move north, which ones are more likely to move deeper, and we know which ones are more likely to tolerate. We know very little about the people. We don't know how often individuals will switch to a new species, how often they're likely to transition and try to keep chasing the species that they were fishing, and we don't know what the social dynamics of this transition with climate change will be like very well at all. But we have learned some really rough lessons from what happens when fisheries decline. And a lot of times in a fisheries management context, we don't have the data necessary to tell the story that is holistic about the human side of it. And so this is a study that I've been doing with John Grabowski at the Marine Science Center over the past 5 or 6 years, trying to understand the human consequences of the Northeast groundfish fishery collapse. So the story starts around 2012 when the industry was notified that the stock assessment was inaccurate or was not matching predictions, and that 90% cuts were going to be needed to be made to recover the fishery and get it on a rebuilding plan. It led to a disaster declaration, 77% reductions, emergency closures. Probably this is pretty well known to most people in the audience. And so what we've been studying with this, because we don't have data, yet we're federally mandated to take care of people in the same way we are fish stocks, is we started studying how there was individual impacts to fishing captains and social disruption in the communities. And for just one figure here, you can just see the story of, if you look from 2011, and what you have on the vertical axis, so your graph here that you're looking at, that's catch limits. So that's how many metric tons of cod were allowed to be caught under the management. And so you can see these steep declines in how many were allowed to be caught from year to year. We did surveys using social science methodology to measure what's called the impact of an event, and it calculates essentially the incidence of PTSD. And we had a clinical sociologist who was part of our study on this, and tells you if the event led to subclinical, mild, moderate, or severe impacts within these individuals. And what we found about a year and a half after the initial collapse, 36% of fishing captains were dealing with severe PTSD, while only 12% were subclinical, 13% were subclinical. And as we studied this over the past 5 years, it generally persisted. So as the fishery continued to collapse, you have an industry that's been dealing with the social and mental health issues of the collapse for 6 years. And these are data, keep in mind, in fisheries management, we're supposed to manage for human well-being, but we generally don't have data to do anything about it. And so these are some of the questions we try to address and try to ask. We don't know all the answers to this. We've done a lot of predictive statistics trying to understand what predicts it. And one of the key things that we found is that it's trust. So having a system where you have high trust in fisheries management, those people tend to do better than the ones who don't. Fishing industry, there's a lot of social capital. They generally work well and trust each other, but then it depends on how the rest of the system is structured. So this was two kind of very separate areas where I was showing you what we were working on that both have relevance for climate change. And I want to just close by showing you what we think places can do to be thinking about these types of things as they prepare for climate change. Well, one is interdisciplinary science can help you understand both sides of this. You can understand what's happening in the fishery and what's happening in the people. Sociology in particular tells us how communities recover from disasters, but there's very key things that we've learned. Not all disasters are the same. If you have a technological disaster like an oil spill, people don't generally recover. They blame each other, and there's this long period of corrosiveness. Same goes if you have people living behind a levee and that levee fails. So that's the type of thing where you can make strategic decisions in how you prepare. And then the other really key thing is to partner. And this is how all of our work is successful. I wanted to give a shout out at this point to Katie Lauderhouse, who's here and who's been playing a big role with a lot of the other Nahant people in the municipal vulnerability preparedness activities. That's super important. And Massachusetts is really ahead of the curve in thinking and investing in these types of things. So that's a really, really positive thing. Yeah, that's probably too long, but thank you for the opportunity. And this is a lot of the people that were involved, but probably still not enough.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Really very interesting. Lots of things to think about. It really is sensitive, isn't it? So, I guess I have to sit there. Yeah. So, I'd like to introduce you to a different presenter with a different hat. Her name is Vi Patek, and you've already heard her bio. And I hope you enjoy hearing some information about trees. So, Michelle, can you do the slides for me? Okay. There is an old Chinese proverb, one generation plants the trees and another enjoys their shade. Next. Trees shelter wildlife and give us lovely flowers. Next. Trees form landmarks visible from the sea. When we go out sailing, we can see this tree at incredible distances. You can see this tree from Marblehead. Next. Trees shelter monarch butterflies when they rest on their migrations. This picture is from Linda Pivacek from 2007, when she saw hundreds, maybe thousands of monarch butterflies rest in this tree, the one we just looked at before, for the night on their migration. We don't see that many monarchs anymore. That's why we have to plant milkweed everywhere as much as we possibly can. So beautiful. Next. Trees matter. Why do trees matter? One of the most important things is soil stabilization. Tree roots help to bind and stabilize the soil and lessen the rate of soil erosion and downstream sedimentation. In Nahant, that sedimentation would go into the ocean. Roots take up water and help create conditions in the soil that promote infiltration. They suck up the water. Next. Trees bring lasting benefits to the people of Nahant. They promote moderate climate, both winter and summer, and they promote healthier lives in many ways. Next. They promote healthier lives. I have to turn so I can read this on the screen. Little devil. Trees absorb through their leaves gases such as carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, and sulfur dioxide that are known to cause respiratory problems and can also increase sensitivity to allergens. I did not know that trees absorb these horrible things, but they do. The cooling and shading effect of urban trees help reduce the rate of ozone production. They actually absorb noise. Our modern life is so noisy, but these leaves are like noise sponges and quieten our communities. Next. Trees make us healthier. Interestingly, heat is reflected upwards from their leaves. So in other words, the sun shines down and they reflect heat up, which significantly reduces summer air temperature. Sometimes we don't think about the effect of the tree and its relationship to the sun when we're in the shade, but that's exactly what it's doing. Dappled shade provides a useful barrier to harmful ultraviolet radiation, as well as reducing heat-induced stress amongst people and animals. Next. How peaceful and quiet it is to pause beneath a shade tree. Without these trees, we would just be exposed. Next. Trees shelter our open spaces by slowing down wind speeds, substantially reducing air turbulence, especially around buildings, making towns and cities more comfortable for people. You've been in those wind tunnels in Boston and New York, and the wind goes howling down the streets. But if you have a good tree cover on the streets, it breaks it up, softens it, and quietens it. The shelter from trees and woods in town also reduces the heating and air conditioning costs of buildings. This can save as much as 10% of annual energy consumption and cut down the air pollution caused by burning fossil fuels. Next. 1 acre of woods can absorb the carbon emissions of one person. 1 acre of woods can absorb the carbon emissions of one person. We need to protect our world's forests. As trees grow, they absorb and store the carbon in their timber, making forests important in the fight to reduce the rate of global climate change. Next. Reduction of flooding by absorption and evaporation is very important. These leaf canopies are like tents that provide a surface area where rainwater lands and evaporates. Somehow we don't think of leaves as doing that. The rain is intercepted by the leaves and then evaporates or drips more gradually to the ground. This lessens the likelihood of flash flooding and helps to conserve groundwater. Using trees in towns as part of sustainable urban drainage systems is a self-sustaining and cost-effective stormwater management strategy. should be used to complement much more expensive hard engineering options. Next. Willows. You see this, you've seen these down at the golf course, although we've lost a lot of them in the last few years. Willows are water pumps, and they help remove floodwater. All trees soak up water, but willows are the champions. You all know Edie Honeywell, maybe lives next to me. She has this gigantic willow. I can't even imagine how much water that tree must suck up. Next. So here it is. 100 mature trees catch almost 250,000 gallons of rainwater a year. And a willow does even better. It is amazing. We need our trees. Next. Then, I think this is my favorite. 100 trees do the work of 1,000 air conditioners. Now, I just really like that. 100 trees do the work of 1,000 air conditioners. Think about it. Think about it when you see our trees coming down all around Nahant for many reasons. We need more trees. Next. One large tree can add 10% to the market value of residential real estate. A house on a lot void of trees is nowhere near as attractive as one with shade trees. Next. If you want to improve your land's ability to absorb rainwater, here are some basics. You need to preserve your trees, manage and care for your trees. If you're putting in driveway or pathways, it should be porous. If you have frontage to the sidewalk and rain is running off towards the sidewalk and the street, you can put in open swale drainage, which is just depressions where the water has a chance to get soaked up. You can put a rain barrel at the bottom of your downspout. You can build rain gardens. Everybody on Nahant received a flyer about rain gardens, and there are more in the back on the table. These are basically depressions into which you plant a garden in a concave area. And these plants can live in dry conditions, and they can also tolerate periodic flooding. And that way you don't have water running off of your property as if it were concrete. Next. Any tree is good. You do not have to plant a tree that's going to be 120 feet tall. You can have a 110-foot white pine. You can have 40-foot trees, 50-foot trees, 20-foot trees like redwoods and dogwoods and crabapples. Every tree matters. Plant trees. Manage your trees. Next. Oh, and I meant to mention there, last year Swim had a tree giveaway program, and we're going to do it again. If you'd like some free trees, they're just little twigs, but they grow fast. You'll be making a difference, and it won't cost you a penny. Planting native trees. Natives are best. Tougher, they need less water, less care. They harbor many more beneficial insects and are more adaptable to climate change. And they are Nahanters. You want to plant Nahanters, not foreigners, because the Nahanters know how to deal with Nahant. They are amazingly stronger than the invasive trees or trees that come from other parts of the world and don't belong here. Next. Diversities of species is critical. Nahant is stuck with a monoculture, which is why so many are dying off. All around Nahant, you'll see trees dying. They have big holes in them, black holes. They're falling down. They have to be cut down. They're cut down and they're hollow and black. And there are a couple of reasons for it. One of it is because many trees were all planted at the same time. So they're all aging out at the same time. Other problem is particularly with the Norway maple. They have a lot of diseases. They weren't born in the United States. They came from Norway. And they're just having a really hard time and are dying at a terrific rate. And we actually need to take them all out, replace them all, and put in native trees. By the way, I am an immigrant, and I love people coming into our country. So I hope this tree presentation doesn't sound, inappropriate. Next. Trees save money. Over 40 years, they can pay off $72,000. The benefits are $161,000 because of energy, air quality, runoff, and real estate effects. Their costs, $89,000, planting, pruning, removal, disposal, irrigation, sidewalk repair, litter, legal, and administration. They're valuable. They make a difference to our budgets, make a difference to our town budgets. Next. And this is the next to last slide. Let's plant trees together. We have to work together to plant trees. If the town plants a tree, we have to have volunteers to water it because we don't have the resources the town does not have the resources for watering baby trees. And the last slide, which is a magical slide. Trees are good for our health. They cool us with their shade and calm us with their beauty. They clean our air and our water. So let's plant trees. So we have gathered questions together ahead of time, and I'm going to ask... Oh, I forgot about you. How could I forget about Barbara? I got so carried away with myself. Barbara will forgive me because we're all pals. All right, Barbara. Barbara Warren, my friend and colleague. She's been a big help with SWIM. Barbara is the executive director of Salem Sound Coast Watch and Mass Bay's Lower North Shore Regional Coordinator. She has a master's in education from Lesley University and a MS in environmental science from Antioch, New England. Most recently, she has become a certified municipal vulnerability provider by the Commonwealth, focusing much of her energy on climate awareness and coastal resilience. Barbara joined Salem Sound Coast Watch in 2003 and has served as executive director for the past 13 years, working to improve and protect the environmental quality of Salem Sound, its watershed, and the North Shore. She also serves as the Lower North Regional Coordinator for the Massachusetts Bay National Estuary Program with Nahant. In her capacity with Salem Coast Watch and its partners, she has developed and implemented citizen scientist programs, including the Adopt a Beach program. The Adopt a Beach program here in Nahant, where we clean the beaches all the time, is entirely because of Barbara. In recognition of her work, Barbara was awarded an Environmental Merit Award by EPA New England and received Salem State University's Friend of the Earth Award. And I welcome Barbara.
So I'm not doing a PowerPoint tonight. I knew that they had a very full agenda and some wonderful speakers and people talking about birds and native plants and trees, and I was asked to talk about pollution. Well, that's what I've been doing for 15 years, so it makes sense. But I thought about it and I thought, well, I think probably everybody in the room knows a lot about pollution, whether you think you know it or not. And so I want to just step back a minute and say, you know, SWIM started for safer waters in Massachusetts, in 1967, so over 50 years, and it was about pollution and making a better place for us. Well, Salem Sound Coast Watch started and it was the region. It's really Nahant, but you were looking at Massachusetts waters, because what I want to talk about tonight is that we've got global problems, but they affect us locally. And so we need to take actions locally. And I invite everyone here, I'm sure you're all already doing some kind of action that reduces pollution, makes our place where we live a healthier place, a safer place for our families, our dogs, our kids, everybody around, the birds. And Salem Sound started in 1990, so we're almost 30 years old. It's sort of hard to believe. I came when we were just barely 10, 12 years old, 13 years old. Time flies. And that was a regional effort, too. It was looked at Salem Sound, and everybody, even now, will say, will call up and will say, you know, we're with Salem Sound, and they'll go, no, you got the wrong number. We're not Salem. And it actually was taken off a nautical chart. Bowditch used the term Salem Sound for the water body that's inside Gales Point in Manchester, Baker's Island, Children's Islands inside over to Nahant's Neck. I mean, not Nahant's Neck, Marblehead Neck. With the Mass Bays National Estuary Program, my reach has been extended to include Nahant, and we're really pleased to be working with Nahant as well. So our first, I think both of organizations really first was looking at bacteria. That was the problem. We had, you know, all our sewerage was untreated and going out into Boston Harbor, was going out into Lynn Harbor, was going out into off of the Beverly Coast. Can't believe that we put up with that for so long. And then once the wastewater treatment plants were updated, it was also then trying to find those illicit connections, convincing people not to put their dog waste into storm drains, which some people are still doing. So we continue to work on bacteria. So one of the flyers that SWIM has passed out to everyone in Nahant, the Greenscapes program with Salem Sound Coast Watch created, is taking care of pet waste. Huge problem. Our goal is to have open shellfish beds again. We would love to be able to do coastal resiliency along our coast with oyster reefs, but we can't do that off of Marblehead or Manchester or Beverly. Probably not Lynn either, because our waters are not safe enough for us to harvest shellfish. So we can't do that. So we've got a bar to keep working up to get that. When we were working, we always knew that our beaches were a problem, that we got trash on our beaches, but I don't think anybody here realized the scale of the waste problem. Plastics. Plastics are now everywhere, and they don't go away. And so now we have a marine debris problem. We don't have a problem of trash on the beach. We have a marine debris problem. And you can say, well, most of it's happening over in Southeast Asia, or, they don't take our recycling anymore. You can always put it on somebody else's problem, but it really is our problem too. And I know in Nahant, I'm pretty sure most people pick up after yourselves and don't throw plastic on the beach, but it washes up on our beach. We're glad that SWIM has taken on the Adopt a Beach program that we started in 2010. And somebody here working for SWIM actually found a key from a cruise ship that had washed ashore. Remember that? And they tracked it, followed, they reported to the EPA, they tracked down the vessel, it was long gone. So this is a global problem, but we need to stay involved. The Skip the Straw. I read about this the other day, that the owner of the Tide restaurant here has voluntarily phased out plastic straws and is working on friendly takeout containers. I mean, this is huge that your community is saying to everyone, and it's the plastic industry, it's the restaurant industry, that we don't want this anymore. We don't want plastics that just pollute our water. So I encourage everyone to find your own sort of solution, what you can do. I know often as environmentalists, as you learn about problems, you feel guilty, you never can do enough. But I think it's Earth Day. We should celebrate what we can do and encourage everyone around us, share it with our friends and our family and our schools to do more and support each other in that process. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was that when we were doing bacteria and then the marine debris problem and plastics, did we realize about the carbon dioxide pollution? So we have a serious problem with climate change, and we are responsible for putting too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and it is changing our world. And we are going to have more intense storms, and we are going to have to look at how we can be resilient in the face of this changing climate. So we have to then again turn around and say, well, what can we do to reduce our footprint, to find that perfect less that is more? And that's what we really need to do in finding the solutions. And I invite you all to be part of finding a solution so that we can make this world a better place on this great Earth Day. Thank you.
So we have a couple of questions that we wanted to ask our speakers. Maybe we could have the lights on up front. I don't know where the switch is. But one question that people keep asking me, and I would love to ask this question of Amy, and that is, what are the plans for the Nahant Thicket Wildlife Sanctuary?
Sure. Does this work, or can I just talk loud? Oh. Okay, I'll try this again. Okay, wonderful. So the update on Nahant Thicket Wildlife Sanctuary is just a brief, I'll make this short, but a brief background. About 2 years ago or so, we started, about maybe 3 years ago, we started the journey into creating a restoration plan for the sanctuary to be able to increase, really there are 3 objectives to the work that we have planned and are planning to do. First is to enhance wildlife habitat, especially for birds. The second one is to address the hydrological constraints that we're faced there at the sanctuary. And the third is to really increase visitor experience through more signage, the boardwalk, the trail. So that's the sort of the 3 goals of the restoration project, and definitely the big driver is for the quality of habitat. So we've done, we've created the plan. We had lots of town meetings. I'm sure most of you or many of you were part of that to be able to hear updates and the plan as well as to provide feedback. We did some invasive plant removal and started that process to identify that. And for the last year, we've been working with, and this process is slower than I personally would like it to be, and a little bit slower than we probably would imagine. But these projects are complicated when you start to deal with hydrology. So we've been working with an engineer and hydrologist to really be able to map out what we can do with the ditch to redesign that. And be able to have the flow well, So we've been doing that for the last, the team at Mass Audubon has been doing that for the last year or so, as well as working on the vast amount of permits to be able to do this work. So we are now at the point that the permits should be going to the Nahant Conservation Commission. Possibly it went today. If it didn't, it will be going in this week, which is a notice of intent to start the process, which is the project is multiple phases. So, the first phase was to develop the plan, get community input. Second phase was to start to work on invasive plant removal and to take down some of the trees around the perimeter that were compromised as well as not native. And then we're launching into the third phase, which is the little bit of the bigger project, which is what really hasn't changed from what many of you saw now a little bit more than a year ago. So once it goes to, permits go to the Conservation Commission, it will then go to their meeting. When we have that meeting, which should happen, if all goes as planned, sometime in the month of May, we plan to have, Mass Audubon will have an opportunity for residents to come to Nahant Thicket so we can do a walk and kind of visually show you guys some of the plans that are going to be presented to the Conservation Commission. Again, the plan is the same, the bones of the plan are the same as are on our website and the same that was developed about a year and a half ago or so.
And the plan is huge, very professional, and is available on the town website. So you can go have a look. It's very detailed, very professional, really outstanding I think we can look forward to collaboration with the town, SWIM, Preservation Trust, and the community, which turned out to those meetings that she mentioned. The whole periphery of the thicket, the people who live all around it, all came to those meetings and volunteered to help maintain the thicket. So it's a really promising situation. So I have a question for Stephen. If living shorelines are so much better for the environment, why do we keep building so many seawalls? What it is, if you move your fingers on this thing, it makes a noise.
Okay. So, good question. It's basically a two-part answer. So one is, from the top down, is policy. So for the longest period of time in the U.S., our federal policy has made it much easier to permit a bulkhead or a seawall than it is try anything new. So there were nationwide permits that you could expedite and put in a hardened structure, and you just couldn't do the same if you wanted to replant a marsh or replant oyster reefs or something like that. Oyster reefs, kind of to the points mentioned, even the hardest to do because it's a consumable shellfish that can get people sick. So there's states like Massachusetts that take a very precautionary approach and won't let you restore it in closed waters. And then there's other states that say, hey, closed waters might be the best restoration success because we're going to plant them and no one's going to take them away. And so there's states definitely on the other side of that, the same way there is with shoreline hardening. So in states like Maryland, you have to prove that a living shoreline will not work before you can get a bulkhead or a seawall. And so they have totally flipped the permitting in the other direction there. And those state level policies seem to work. The other is, even if you can get the permitting landscape flat, there's individual decisions. And we've studied this in 5 or 6 states now, and a consistent thing that we found is that if you look for the strongest predictor of what an individual homeowner wants for their shoreline landscape, the strongest predictor is what their neighbor has. So you get neighborhoods with natural shorelines, and then the neighbor gets erosion, and they prefer to deal with it in a natural way. And then you get neighborhoods where bulkheads are the norm, and that's the preference. So there's a big role for communication and kind of, cross-learning, I think, in going forward.
Try this way. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'd like a big round of applause for our speakers. And I invite you to mingle with them, ask your questions. There are all kinds of wonderful things to eat and drink back there. No champagne, sorry. And thanks again for coming, and happy Earth Day.